Hello, today I'm going to be talking through my ASP.NET website I've been building recently. I've been building this in my spare time. I've recently just got work in industry, so I've been doing this prior to getting that job. Yeah, it's just been a way of keeping myself busy, keeping myself, keeping myself learning new skills and upskilling. That for me is very important. So I chose ASP.NET because it's quite a common platform to use these days. For instance, Stack Overflow, as far as I'm aware, is in the ASP.NET format. So I thought it'd be an interesting little route to go down. And also it uses the model view controller system, which is something that I'm quite interested in terms of separation of concerns. It's nice to be able to divide the program down into simple categories. So that's why I've chosen ASP.NET. So what we have here today is a web page or a website with European food from various European countries. And what I'm going to do today is talk through the back-end code, or what's going on in the background, and then we'll have a little look at the front end and look at some of the things that are happening on the client's perspective, from the client's perspective. So here what we'll do first is we'll go into my countries list, and I'll just have a little discussion about what we have here in this front page. So the first thing we have here is we have a heading tag, which is centralized text. It's using Bootstrap, so it uses the text center, it has a welcome to Bob's European Food, nice and simple, something to introduce the page to. And then it also has a simple flag here. Now the flag itself is actually a responsive image, and again it uses the Bootstrap class of image responsive center block. So it centralizes the image and makes it responsive as well. And I'll show you why it's responsive shortly. And then it has an alt tag of European flag, and the reason why I've included an alt tag is just for usability purposes, accessibility, just improving the overall website score. And then we have the same thing here, a heading class, again centralized, choose a country. Nice and simple so far. And then what we have here now is where the C# element of the program comes into play. So what I have here is a for each loop, which is looping through my country's model, and it's printing to the screen the name of the countries. And I'm sure you're probably wondering why I'm using a string replace value to replace the underscore here with a blank, an empty string. I'll explain that in a minute. It's mainly for, it's to allow the program to read the way I've structured it a little bit more simply. It's a little error that I came across that I managed to fix, so it was quite annoying, but solved it in the end. So and then the action name is index. That's just the standard name for each controller action, and then the controllers themselves are the countries that are looped through, and the name. So if we go into my country controller, sorry, my model, here we just have a single property called string name, and what that is just here where we are basically using this controller, the country's model, to pass in various names. So I've passed in all the European countries here. There are quite a few. I didn't realise there were just as many European countries, and countries that have changed their name recently. For instance, North Macedonia, recent name change. Kosovo, that's an interesting country because it's not formally recognised in some places, but I thought I'd include it because it's categorised as a European country in many places. And then finally we have a var where I basically order the countries by their name. I use a tertiary statement here just to try and find what do you call it? My brain's gone blank now. It is a tertiary statement to pass in the name and then set it into a list and order by the name, so it appears alphabetically. And then I take the countries that I've here pass through here. I make it equivalent to the sorted list of countries, and then finally I return the view model, which is the country view model, which is the sorted countries list. So it is essentially just a list of the countries printed out on the screen. So with that in mind, I now then use that country view model, or pass that country view model into my view, my countries list view, which is also my homepage, and then I use that to loop through the countries model just here, which is the name, and then it's using the name, replacing it with this particular little underscore here, and then we've discussed that earlier. So basically the reason why I'm doing this is, if you look in my names, for instance, Czech Republic here has an underscore, as does Bosnia and Herzegovina, as does North Macedonia and Northern Ireland. Now you cannot, obviously, as you may know, you cannot put a space in between these when you're creating a controller name. You need to have some sort of a delimiter. Now unfortunately, when I had the delimiter, what was happening was that my web page was displaying the delimiter, and I didn't like the idea of the delimiter being displayed. It didn't look correct. So what I did was I used a string replace to remove the delimiter or the underscore and replace it with a just a blank string, essentially. So there you get a nice gap in between the words, and it's more aesthetically pleasing to the eye to see it that way. So pardon me, clicked the wrong thing. So then we have some simple styling on there, just some simple padding, which allows the text just to have some spaces in between and at the bottom of each thing. Just again, mainly so it just looks a bit more presentable. Okay, so then I have a few line breaks as well, which is where the spaces occur here. So it just adds a little bit more padding. It's just something I saw it and I thought it just needs that little bit more padding. It's that final little touch that I need, and I'm happy. So as we see here, we have a responsive center block image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the developer mode, and we will have a little look at the web page in a mobile view. So if we do that now, we can see now that the image itself has shrunk to a nice respectable size for the web page, and the text is still being displayed in a nice listed order just here, and it's not really ruining the feel based, despite the fact that it is on a smaller screen. And then if we go to a responsive view and we start toggling with the layout slightly, you can see that it adjusts based upon that. So it's fully responsive, which for me is quite important. If you ever build a website, it needs to be responsive. And then also for me, what's really important is running a Lighthouse audit. So every time I'm building a page in any kind of web platform, I always run a regular Lighthouse audit amongst what I'm doing, just to make sure that it's meeting the requirements of the user. So if we quickly generate a report here of my website in a desktop view, we can see that it gains 100% in everything, apart from the progressive web app, because that's not something I'm aiming to do in this particular project. I will probably create a progressive web app sometime down in the future, but this is just simply to get the feel of MVC.net. So I decided to, ASP.net model view controller. So I decided to avoid that kind of particular situation. What I'll do actually is best practices. So I didn't include that. Let's rerun that again quickly, just to show what we have. And there we go. So we have 100% score across the board for performance, accessibility, best practices, and search engine optimization. So every time I was building the page, I would notice something that might be wrong. For instance, meta tags without descriptions. So I put that in there, and I managed to get a good score across the board. So I was quite pleased with that. And then you're probably wondering about this nav bar here. So the nav bar the layout of the page itself actually comes through a shared folder called layouts. So if we go into my solution explorer and go into my views, and then we pop down into my shared folder just here and look at my layout, and what we have here is we have the styles that are being called in, and they're being run at the server, so they're regularly being updated as the server is running, or being when the server is being refreshed. So is the information being passed through the style sheets that I've added myself, and I will come to them style sheets shortly. And then the meta tag, which of course improves search engine optimization, and then I have a section where I can render individual meta tags for each page, but I just have a kind of currently I just have a generic meta tag which covers the entire page. And then I pull through a partial view called Nav Bar, and then I render the body as well as a little footer with a copyright underneath it with the Eurofood, and then render some jQuery and Bootstrap so I can interact with the hamburger menu when it is in mobile view. So if we see here in mobile view, we have a hamburger menu here, and the jQuery and Bootstrap allows that to run. So with that in mind, all Oh, I'll also quickly run an audit actually in mobile view as well, just to quickly show that it runs nicely in mobile view as well. There we go, and again 100% score for both the desktop and the mobile view for this particular page. So then if we go back to here, we notice that we have a partial view which contains a nav bar. So if we go to the nav bar itself, the nav bar, it is essentially just the nav bar itself. It has an action link which when the words where is it, Bob's Euro Food is clicked, it just redirects back to the countries list action from the countries controller, which is the thing just here where it is displaying that front page, nice and simple. And I chose to do a loop because I could iterate through each country nice and simply without having to print it out one by one, which I knew would be a bit of a headache if I tried to do that. So I'll just remove these now because we pretty much covered that. And yeah, again, the nav bar is also coming from Bootstrap. And the actual layout itself I have gained from, if I can find it, a custom Bootstrap format called Slate min CSS. Now originally it wasn't a minified file, it was a full file, it was a full Bootstrap file, but it was impacting my page load time, so I decided to minify it. So it's quite busy, it looks quite busy, but it does really help with the page load times, and it just creates a nice dark theme really. You know, I didn't really like the default template look. I wanted something with a bit of a, you know, something a bit more interesting to look at, and I thought the dark and the light contrast quite nicely. I use a dark theme myself in most of my web pages as well, so you know, it's easy on the eye for anyone who wants to view it, which is obviously evident by the SEO the accessibility score that I received. So also, yeah, as we say, the nav bar is also responsive as well, and we'll create a hamburger menu which will additionally add these. So it's all responsive based upon the web page. So that's enough about the front page now, and have spoke for quite a while, so I want to get into the meat and bones of this actual project. So if we go to Albania, for instance, in the first country in the list, what we have here again is we have the Albanian flag. So if I pop into my program and go into my views, Albania, we have the index page, which is the home page of this particular site, and I'm just going to close these down now because, you know, I want to keep this all separated. Separation of concerns throughout my life, I'm sure. And then we'll open up the Albania. So we see how the logic works in the background, and we'll also open each of these pages as well, so I can discuss it as I go along. So if we start off with the controller is simply pulling through some views. We have the index page view where we're returning the index page view. We have the starters page where we're returning that view, and then we have the Albanian main recipes where we're returning that view, and then the desserts where we're returning that view. So if we just click on the index here, it takes us to the index CS HTML view here. And again, it's using that shared layout, so the standard layout of each web page. I wanted to what I wanted to achieve in each web page was a consistency. I wanted to achieve consistency between each web page because, you know, having read a lot of literature about accessibility and usability principles and best practices, I find that it's quite important to have consistency between each web page so that the user feels that they're in a familiar place each time. So I went down that route and had a shared layout for each page. And then again, if we pop to Albania, here we are, we have our H1 tag, but what I've done this time is I've encased it in a strong tag just to give it a bit of a more bold appearance, make it pop out a bit more. Another thing that I noticed as well when I was creating the, where are we, the recipe navigation tag, it's just here, was that what I had here was I had a H1 for Welcome to Albania, but then I had a H3 for recipe navigation, which was slightly ruining my SEO, because obviously in terms of structure the heading should be traveling in a descending order. So I had to make some changes there, but you know, it fixed the SEO of the page in the end. And then I have a simple breadcrumb which allows me to navigate through the different pages here. So we have the action link, which is a self-generated anchor tag. And the anchor tag will contain a word that says countries, like here, and then it will be calling itself from the countries controller and pulling out the countries list, which is essentially the main screen that we see here, as discussed before. And then going on from that, we have the highlighted current page that's highlighted. It can't be interacted with as the others can. It's just simply to tell the user that they are on that current page. So if we go here, it's just simply a list tag with the class of active, which is recognized by a breadcrumb as being the current active tab in that list. And then we also have the Albanian starters coming from the Albania controller just here. And here we are, get Albania, so it's coming from this particular controller, and this controller contains Albanian starters view, which is just here. And if we switch to that view, here we have the starters, and again it runs the very similar situation here with if I switch to it, I can show you more better the Albania starter recipes. I decided not to do that section in strong, because I thought, you know, it'd be good to have a nice individualistic splash page with a nice bold title, and then once you're there, you know that you're in Albania, so then we can go back to the traditional view. So then we have the same breadcrumb situation here, where we're now on the starter page. So now the starter is highlighted, and we can access these other two. So that's how the navigation works within the system. So if I pop back into the main page here, one thing I should mention as well actually is you may have noticed that there is a text left class here. Now that text left actually is quite important, because if we go into my styles and my recipes, here we can see that I have a media query running, which based upon the screen width, a maximum width of 999 pixels, the actual text will align itself to the center based upon the screen size. The image responsibility will make itself centralized, and the list will also become centralized, and the breadcrumb list will be pushed slightly forward to the right, and I'll show you how that works shortly, but it's important to understand that this is running on a media query. And then we have some you know, some ways of being able to separate the create space in the page without using several different line breaks, and that's something that I didn't really think of doing at the start, and then I thought, well, why don't I just do that in CSS? It'd be so much easier. I did still like to use line breaks because they're nice and quick to type down, just for simple situations. But if I needed a decent sized space, then I could break it into categories of small, or just a standard space with various pixels based upon the size. Oh, I just noticed actually that should be the other way around, but that's fixable. I can do that a bit later. So if we pop into my starters, we can see here's an example of the text left. So what will happen here is when the text initially is on the left here, as you can see from the navigation, but if we switch to a mobile view, the image will automatically snap to the center, which in terms of a mobile view is just a bit easier to see because everything kind of runs down the center of the page just like this. Now, so if you see a reference to the word text left, basically what that is the text will originally appear on the left, as for instance this Albanian cuisine here, about Albanian cuisine here will. But then once you change the screen view to a smaller than 990 pixels, it will snap to the center just to make the just to make it a little bit more easier on the eye in terms of a mobile view. It all just kind of cascades down nicely. And I've also made sure that the text is justified as well, just to keep it within the box, keep it nice and neat. That's something that I quite like to do anyway, and it's justified in both senses here, and these are already centralized. So that's essentially, oh sorry, I'm on the wrong page there we go, back to the index. And we for instance, I'm wrapping this about Albanian cuisine here in a divider tag or a div tag, which has the text left class within it, so that will realize using the media query that it needs to snap to the center when the screen has changed to a mobile view, as can be seen there. So if you do see that there, that's basically what's happening there throughout this program. So anyway, so we can move on to the starters now and have a little look here. Now this will probably be the last thing I discuss throughout this page, because to be honest, the logic of the page is pretty much run the same from here. So what we have here is we have an image, and what I'm doing for each image, I'm actually using a WebP file format. Now WebP for me Again, when I was auditing my web pages, was recommended as a better standard to use because it's the compression it offers is a lot better. It still offers the same level of quality as a JPEG image, but with a lot more compression. So in order to make that work, I actually had to go into my web config file and just add a little section here where my server would recognize the file extension of WebP as a valid extension, because initially it wasn't understanding what WebP was. So if you are coming across a similar issue yourself in the future, that's why. And then we have an alt tag again just to explain what the picture is, just in case someone's experiencing poor load times in their screen. And again, all the headers are in descending order, again for to make the to make the page more usable, to make the SEO better as well. So then simply here we just have the actual list of ingredients, for instance a marinade for the chicken and the kebabs themselves. So if we switch into our starters just here, I'll just pop out of this view for a moment. We have the kebabs and the list of the kebabs, the marinade and the list of the marinades, and then the same for the method. And it uses a bootstrap template just to break it into columns, so that they have their own little sections. So that's a column, that's a column, and that's a column. And each image again is using a responsive tag, so the image will be responsive based upon the size of the screen. And again, responsive images, responsive web pages for me are a must, because mobile platforms are, having studied in university, mobile platforms are just as common as as web pages. In fact, more common. People will more commonly view them now on mobile devices than they will on a web page. So it's important to be able to cater for both sides of the audience, which is why I've taken that into consideration with all those little added details. And here we can just see an example of me using my divider with this space class here, just to create a little space between each I'm just trying to remember what it is now. It is a well in between each well, and the well themselves again is a fluid container, so that again will be responsive based upon the size of the image. Right, so I'll show you this final thing. So if we go again to our developer view and we run an audit on the mobile view of this particular page here, I'll let it run its audit in the background there. We can see that it generates a perfect score across the board, because it's using these WebP images, which I don't know if I can find out a huge deal about these, but WebP, not entirely sure, but I know that the size, if I pop into a WebP image, if we go into Albania and go to starters, this chicken kebab for instance here is merely 57.7 kilobytes, so it's a tiny file, it really is, so it loads so much quicker. So I can't recommend the use of that. Sorry, a little noise came outside and that might have been my cat. So I can't recommend the use of WebP enough myself from a development perspective. And again, if we switch into mobile view, this is all nice and laid out as well, and it just automatically centralizes itself based upon the layout of the page. And for instance here I have padding and margins between each of my breadcrumb navigations here, just so when it's on mobile view it's still just as simple to click it. And again, that was very important for best practice. And again, if we run the same audit again in a desktop view, and give it a moment to do that, the page will generate again a perfect score across the board. And then if we go into mains and again just quickly run a audit in mobile view, just as another example, and again that scores a perfect 100%. And if we go to desserts and run the audit there as well, that also scores a perfect 100% score across the board. So again, I've made sure that each page is responsive based upon the screen size, and I'm using various CSS commands to make the images to make the text change based upon the view. So currently here it's all centralized, and as soon as you switch back to standard view, it pops itself back into the left again. So, and again, if we click here and we try to view it on, say, an iPad, you know, it will still be just as easy to view. You know, it still works, you know, still fit for purpose. And then if you even try and view it on an iPad Pro, it still works very nicely, you know. Everything's still where it needs to be. So yeah, that's basically the page itself. You know, this is what I've been working on recently. If we go to Andorra, this is something I completed recently. Again, it's just information about what they would eat as a main in Andorra. Interestingly enough, they eat pig snout and trotters. So yeah, and in what they eat for desserts, a little bit about the culture and history of the cuisine itself, and then the starters. And these are all royalty free images as well. I didn't want to step over anybody's toes whilst I was using these images, you know, so I've been taking these images and keeping note of where I get them from to credit the user correctly. And then spinach and some potato cakes there, and mains. We have a nice meat stew and chicken stew. So I'm hoping to build this over time, and hopefully one day be able to put this online so people can view it and enjoy the recipes that I'm, you know, building over time. I have a background as a chef, so it's something that I'm quite aware of, cooking and the different techniques. So yeah, it's a really exciting little project. If we go here, it takes us right back to our home page, as does that, just in case the user gets confused between the purposes of the two. We have an about, which I've just kept there from the standard template as before. And we also have a contact page, and I'll edit them a bit later on. At the moment I'm just focusing on this, on each country here, and again each country has a flag which is in WebP view, and again the flag is all responsive based upon the size of the screen, and as is the navigation as well. So it's all been taken into account. Each page has its own alt tags. Each page, you know, no matter where I run the audit, here we go. No matter where I run the audit in the page, the response the response I always get is 100% for each thing. So I've really taken my time and crafted this over the past few weeks. So it's just an example of what I you know, this is something I've only really learnt recently, but it's an example of what I'm capable of doing if I'm given enough time and you know, effort to be able to build something using my own research and my own methods. So I'm quite pleased with it. So I just really want to thank you for watching the video. If you've made it this far, I'm absolutely astounded, because it was quite a long video, but I really do appreciate you taking the time to watch what I've built here today. And if you have any questions, please pop them in the comments, or if not, drop me a question on my LinkedIn page, or I have a GitHub account too, which can be accessed from my LinkedIn page if you want to see this code in action from a more developer point of view. Okay, thank you everybody, and take care.